The blueprint they'd laid out was perfect. I stood there, my breathing shallow as I watched Madeline's perfectly manicured fingernail trace a circle around the fatal flaw in my presentation. The conference room lights seemed to brighten, highlighting every flaw in my skin, every nervous twitch in my hands. "This design is quaint," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "But our clients expect innovation, not whatever this is." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Finley, our CFO, cleared his throat as if to speak, but Madeline's raised eyebrows silenced him. She'd been at the company less than 8 months, yet somehow wielded this power. "Rhiannon," Adeline chimed in, her voice falsely sweet as she adjusted her glasses. "We've noticed a pattern in your work lately, a lack of vision." I stared at the presentation I'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. The quarterly numbers were undeniable. My designs had increased sales by 32%, but looking at the faces around me, I realized numbers didn't matter anymore. "Perhaps," said Madeline, sliding forward a folder I hadn't noticed before, "it's time to consider whether your talents might be better utilized elsewhere." Inside was a separation agreement, predated from 2 weeks ago. They'd planned this ambush long before today's meeting. Before I'd even finished the presentation, they were now tearing apart. "Verity wanted us to give you this opportunity to resign gracefully," said Griffin, the third member of their triumvirate, his fingers steepled as if in prayer. "Given your history with her." My throat closed at the mention of Verity's name, my mentor, my champion. Now, undergoing her 3rd round of treatments, too weak to attend board meetings, too distant to see what was happening in the company she'd built from nothing. "I'd like to speak with Verity directly," I managed, my voice embarrassingly thin. Madeline's smile tightened. She specifically asked not to be bothered with this, said it was too disappointing. That single word, disappointing, pierced deeper than anything else they could have said. The thought of disappointing Verity was unbearable. "We need your decision today," Griffin added, sliding a pen toward me. "For the sake of the company." I looked around the table, faces I'd worked alongside for years now, carefully avoiding my gaze. The security guard hovering by the door, apparently there to escort me out regardless of my decision. The humiliation burned through me like acid through metal. 5 years of my life, countless nights, designs that had transformed this small studio into a recognized name, all being erased in a 15-minute meeting. I signed the paper. "Your personal items have been packed," Adeline said, her voice bright as if this were a celebration. "No need to return to your workspace." As I stood to leave, Madeline placed a hand on my shoulder. "Creative fields can be so volatile. Perhaps something more stable would suit you better." I walked out with a cardboard box of belongings, their murmurs following me until the heavy glass doors closed behind me. On the sidewalk, I looked up at the elegant sign I'd helped design, Veracity Jewelry Design. 2 years later, I would walk through those same doors again, but everything would be different. Because what Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin didn't know as they orchestrated my humiliating exit was that they had just set in motion the beginning of their own downfall, and I would be the architect of it. Wait, before I continue with what happened after that terrible day, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more revenge stories that will make your heart race. Drop a comment about what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have signed that paper? I'd love to hear your thoughts. My name is Rhiannon Wesley. I'm 34 years old with a master's degree in fine arts and a specialization in metalwork and gemology. Growing up, I was the quiet girl with calloused hands who'd rather spend lunch periods sketching designs than socializing. My mother was a nurse who worked double shifts. My father left when I was 4. We never had much, but we had enough. Jewelry design wasn't just a career choice for me. It was the language I spoke when words failed. Each piece I created told a story, carried an emotion, preserved a memory. In my hands, metal and stone became more than decorative objects. They became vessels of meaning. I met Verity Blackwood when I was 29, struggling to make rent by selling my designs at local markets while working as a barista. She bought a pair of my earrings, then returned the next weekend for a necklace. On her 3rd visit, she didn't buy anything. Instead, she handed me her business card. "I've been watching how you talk about your work," she said. You don't sell jewelry. You translate human experiences into wearable art. I need someone like you. Verity was 62 then, a legend in the industry who had built Veracity from her kitchen table 30 years earlier. Despite her success, she still had soil under her fingernails from her garden and wore jewelry that sometimes looked peculiar but always felt right against the skin. My first day at Veracity, she didn't put me in the design department. Instead, she sat me at a workbench beside her and handed me a misshapen lump of silver. Make something honest, she said. I worked that silver for 8 hours, forming it into a pendant that resembled a seed breaking open. When I finished, my hands were trembling with exhaustion. Verity examined it, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Then she nodded once. You understand the difference between decorating a body and honoring it. That's rare. Within 2 years, I became creative director. My designs helped transform Veracity from a respected local studio into a national name with waiting lists and features in prestigious magazines. Our pieces weren't the most expensive on the market, but they became known for how they moved with the body, how they caught light at unexpected angles, how they felt alive against the skin. Then Verity got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. Keep designing, she told me from her hospital bed. The company needs your voice. With Verity absent, the board brought in industry veterans to help maintain stability. Madeline Thorne, with her perfectly styled bobbin background at a famous auction house. Adeline Winters, with her academic credentials and connections to wealthy collectors. Griffin Peck, with his sales experience and charismatic presentations. They arrived with portfolios of impressive achievements and immediately began questioning everything about Veracity's approach. The market is shifting, Madeline explained during her first week. We need to adjust our positioning. At first, I tried to collaborate. I shared my design process, my insights about our clients, the philosophy Verity had built the company on. They nodded and took notes and smiled in ways that never reached their eyes. Then, strange things began happening. A custom wedding ring I designed for an important client developed a crack before the presentation. My sketchbook disappeared for 3 days, then reappeared with subtle alterations to key designs. Client meetings I was scheduled to lead were suddenly reassigned to Madeline or Griffin, who would return with feedback that contradicted everything the client had originally requested. They felt your design was too unconventional, Griffin would explain, though when I checked with the clients later, they expressed confusion about why their requests had been changed. Premium sapphires I'd selected for a signature collection were swapped for lower quality stones that lacked the depth of color I'd specified. Budget considerations, Adeline explained, though our profit margins were higher than ever. During an important presentation to our biggest potential client, slides showcasing my most innovative designs were mysteriously corrupted, showing only blank screens. Technology, Madeline sighed, before smoothly transitioning to her own prepared materials. They were careful, always. Nothing could be directly traced back to sabotage. Nothing I could take to the board as evidence. Just a steady erosion of my work, my reputation, my confidence. When I tried to visit Verity in the hospital to tell her what was happening, I found Adeline already there. She's resting, Adeline said, blocking the doorway. The doctors say stress could worsen her condition. She specifically asked not to be troubled with work matters. I later learned from a nurse that Verity had been asking for me, but my messages were never delivered. The isolation was calculated and complete. Staff members I'd worked alongside for years began avoiding me, whispering when I entered rooms, questioning decisions I'd made 100 times before. We're just concerned, Madeline would say during meetings, her voice gentle as she outlined another of my supposed failures. We all want what's best for Verity's company. By the time they orchestrated my final humiliation in that board meeting, I was already a ghost in the company I'd helped build. The separation agreement wasn't just the end of my job. It was the culmination of months of carefully orchestrated psychological warfare. I left Veracity that day, believing I had failed Verity, believing I had never been good enough, believing the spark that had once made my design special had somehow burned out. For 6 months, I couldn't touch metal or sketch a design. I moved to a smaller apartment, took a job teaching basic metalwork at a community center, and tried to rebuild some semblance of a life. But something inside me had broken the day I walked out of Veracity. Then came the call that changed everything. Ms. Wesley, this is Bartholomew Reed, attorney for Verity Blackwood. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Verity had passed away. After months of fighting, the cancer had finally won. She asked to see you many times near the end, Bartholomew said, his voice gentle. Her care team said your visits were repeatedly blocked by colleagues claiming to be protecting her rest periods. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. She had wanted to see me. She hadn't been disappointed in me. There's more, Bartholomew continued. Ms. Blackwood made some significant changes to her will in her final weeks. She's requested your presence at the reading tomorrow morning. I arrived at Bartholomew's office, expecting nothing more than perhaps a small memento, a final goodbye from my mentor. What I didn't expect was to find Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin already seated in the conference room, their expressions a mixture of surprise and poorly concealed annoyance at my arrival. What is she doing here? Madeline asked, not bothering to hide her disdain. Bartholomew simply adjusted his glasses and began reading Verity's will. The room fell silent as the words washed over us. Verity had left me everything: the company, the property, the inventory, all assets and intellectual property rights. Veracity Jewelry Design, valued at over $3 million, was now entirely mine. This can't be legal, Griffin sputtered, his face flushing red. She wasn't in her right mind. We'll contest this. Bartholomew slid a video across the table. Ms. Blackwood anticipated your reaction. She recorded this with 2 independent medical professionals certifying her mental competence. The video showed Verity, thin but clear-eyed, speaking directly to the camera. Rhiannon, if you're watching this, I failed to protect you, and for that, I am deeply sorry. What happened at Veracity in my absence was not what I intended. These 3 individuals, she gestured to photographs of Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin, were brought in against my better judgment by board members who believed their industry connections would benefit the company. She took a labored breath before continuing. What they didn't understand is that Veracity was never about connections or trends. It was about honesty in design, about creating pieces that honor the wearer rather than simply decorating them. You understood that from the beginning. That's why I'm leaving everything to you, because you're the only one who truly knows what veracity means. The video ended, and the room remained silent for several long moments. This changes nothing, Adeline finally said, her voice tight. We have contracts, legal agreements that guarantee our positions. I looked to Bartholomew, who nodded encouragingly. Then, I guess I'll see you tomorrow, I said, standing up, at the company I now own. As I walked out, I heard Griffin's angry voice. She doesn't know what she's doing. She'll run it into the ground within a year. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I didn't know what I was doing. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would rather burn Veracity to the ground than let them continue to desecrate what Verity had built. What I didn't yet know was exactly how I would reclaim not just the company, but the confidence they had so methodically destroyed. I had ownership on paper, but they had spent months embedding themselves into every aspect of the business. They had allies on staff, connections with clients, and a head start on manipulating the company's systems. As I stood outside Bartholomew's office, the weight of what lay ahead almost crushed me. How could I possibly outmaneuver 3 people who had made careers out of strategic deception? But then I remembered something Verity had told me on my first day. Metal remembers. Every time you hammer it, fold it, heat it, it keeps a record. Your job is to make those memories beautiful. Perhaps it was time to see what memories Veracity held about Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin. And perhaps it was time to hammer out something new from the material of my own pain. Tomorrow, I would walk back into Veracity. And this time, I wouldn't be leaving. The next morning, I arrived at Veracity 30 minutes before opening. The security guard did a double take as I approached the glass doors, hesitating before letting me in. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on me. Less than 7 months ago, a different guard had watched me leave with a box of personal items. My dignity in tatters. Ms. Wesley, he said, nodding respectfully as he held the door. Welcome back. The studio was quiet, morning light streaming through the tall windows. I stood in the reception area, allowing memories to wash over me, both good and painful. The display cases showcasing our most iconic pieces. The framed photo of Verity on opening day 30 years ago. The workbenches visible through the glass partition where artisans would soon be arriving. I walked slowly toward what had once been my design studio, noticing immediately how it had changed. My organized chaos had been replaced with sterile minimalism. The inspiration wall where I'd pinned sketches, material samples, and client notes was now bare except for a single framed magazine cover featuring Madeline accepting an industry award. A voice behind me made me jump. "You're early." I turned to find Pierre, our master metalsmith who had worked with Verity for nearly 20 years. His eyes were cautious, but not unkind. "I wanted a moment to reorient myself," I said. He nodded, studying my face. "They told us you had a breakdown, that you couldn't handle the pressure anymore." The statement hung between us, neither accusation nor question. "And what did you think, Pierre?" His weathered hands traced the edge of a nearby workbench. "I thought that in 30 years of metalwork, I've never seen pressure crack something that wasn't flawed to begin with." Before I could respond, the elevator chimed. The morning staff began arriving, some stopping in surprise at the sight of me, others hurrying past with averted eyes. Many were faces I recognized, though there were several I didn't. At precisely 8:30, the triumvirate arrived together, as though choreographed. They faltered only slightly upon seeing me standing in the center of the main floor. Madeline recovered first, her perfect smile sliding into place. "Rhiannon," she said, approaching with open arms, as if we were old friends. "What a lovely surprise. We didn't expect you so soon." "I own a jewelry company now," I replied, stepping back from her attempted embrace. "Seems like I should check in." Griffin laughed, too loudly. Of course. Though there's no need to disrupt your schedule, we have everything under control here." "I'm sure you do," I said. "That's why I've called an all-staff meeting in 30 minutes. Conference room A." Adeline's smile tightened. "We actually have client presentations this morning. Perhaps we could schedule something for later this week? Give you time to adjust." "The meeting stands," I said, turning to walk toward Verity's, now my, office. "Oh, and I've invited Bartholomew Reed to join us. He has some interesting insights about the company's legal structure." I didn't wait for their response. Verity's office was largely untouched, a shrine rather than a functional workspace. Her glasses still sat on the desk. A half-finished cup of tea, long since evaporated, remained on the side table. Her garden shears lay beside a vase of dried flowers. They had preserved it perfectly, telling the staff it was out of respect. But I knew better. This room was their trophy, physical proof of their successful takeover. I sat in Verity's chair and began reviewing the files Bartholomew had sent over the previous night. Financial statements, client contracts, employee records, the legal framework of the company Verity had built and I now owned. When I entered conference room, 30 minutes later, every seat was filled. Staff members glanced nervously between me and the trio, who had positioned themselves at the opposite end of the table. Bartholomew sat quietly to my right, his leather portfolio closed before him. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "For those who don't know me, I'm Rhiannon Wesley. I was creative director here until about 7 months ago. And now she's our new owner," Madeline interjected, her tone suggesting she was helping me along. "A surprising development for us all." I nodded. Surprising indeed, especially given the circumstances of my departure. The room tensed. "But today isn't about the past," I continued. "It's about Veracity's future. Verity built this company on a philosophy that jewelry should honor the wearer, not just decorate them. That philosophy will continue to guide us going forward." Griffin cleared his throat. "While sentiment is valuable, Rhiannon, the market has evolved. Our current direction has increased quarterly profits by 17%. At what cost?" I asked, opening the folder before me. "Client retention has dropped by 38%. Custom commissions, once our hallmark, are down by over half. Social media engagement has plummeted." "Initial growing pains," Adeline said dismissively. The new clientele we're attracting spends more per purchase. They buy once and don't return, I countered. That's not sustainable growth. Madeline's smile never wavered. Perhaps this is a conversation best had in private. Staff meetings are typically for operational updates, not strategy discussions. I disagree, I said. Everyone in this room contributes to what makes Veracity special. They deserve to understand the company's direction. I turned to address the wider group. Starting today, we're returning to our core values: quality over quantity, artistry over mass production, connection over transaction. The trio exchanged glances. Griffin leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. Rhiannon, before you make sweeping changes, there's something you should know. He slid 3 folders across the table. These are our employment contracts, signed by the board during Verity's illness. We each hold the title of senior partner with protected decision-making authority. I opened the first folder, skimming the document inside. The terms were exactly as Griffin had indicated. Each of them had been granted substantial authority and protection from termination. Interesting, I said, passing the folders to Bartholomew. We're not trying to undermine you, Adeline added, her voice gentle. We simply want to ensure a smooth transition. These agreements protect the company's stability. Bartholomew adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents. The room was silent, tension building with each passing second. These appear to be in order, he finally said. Madeline's smile widened. Wonderful. Now that's settled, perhaps we can... However, Bartholomew continued, as legal counsel for Verity Blackwood, and now for Ms. Wesley, I should point out that these agreements, while binding, are subject to the company's articles of incorporation. He opened his portfolio and removed a document. Section 7, paragraph 3, states that, while senior partners may not be terminated without cause, the owner retains the right to reassign responsibilities and restructure departments as needed for the company's benefit. The trio's confident expressions faltered. What exactly does that mean? Griffin demanded. I leaned forward. It means you can keep your titles and your salaries, but as of today, your responsibilities are changing. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. I reassigned Madeline from client relations to inventory management, Adeline from marketing to quality control, Griffin from sales to production support. This is absurd, Madeline hissed as the meeting concluded. You can't possibly expect us to accept these positions. Your contracts guarantee your titles and compensation, not your specific roles, I replied. You're welcome to resign, of course. You think you're being clever, Griffin said, his voice low, but you have no idea what you're up against. Actually, I do, I said. I've spent 7 months thinking about nothing else. As the staff filed out, many lingered, wanting to speak but hesitant. Finally, Pierre approached. The Augusta Commission, he said quietly. They've been asking for you specifically. Refuse to work with anyone else. I felt a small flame of hope ignite. They're still interested? He nodded. There are others too. Clients who left when you did. Word travels fast in this industry. Over the next weeks, the battle lines were clearly drawn. The trio refused to resign, determined to wait me out. They performed their new duties with bare minimum effort while meeting secretly with board members, suppliers, and key clients. I worked 18-hour days, reconnecting with former clients, rebuilding relationships with artisans, and most importantly, designing again. My fingers remembered what my mind had tried to forget, the way metal yields to persistent pressure, the way stones reveal their true character under proper light. 1 month after my return, I unveiled a new collection, 7 pieces inspired by resilience and renewal. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Orders flooded in, press coverage exploded, former clients returned, bringing new ones with them. Through it all, Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin watched and waited, their smiles growing more strained with each success. I knew they were plotting something. Their whispered conversations stopped when I approached. Their sudden business trips coincided with meetings of our most important suppliers. They're trying to turn the board against you, Bartholomew warned during one of our weekly meetings, suggesting your changes are too radical, too risky. Let them try, I said, showing him the latest sales figures. The breaking point came 3 months after my return. I arrived early, as had become my habit, to find my office door ajar. Inside, Griffin was at my computer, downloading files to an external drive. Gathering research? I asked from the doorway. He startled but quickly recovered. Just collecting some historical data the board requested. Nothing confidential. Of course, I said, making no move to stop him. Though next time, you might want to ask first. He left with the drive, and I made no attempt to prevent it. Instead, I called Bartholomew. It's happening, I said, just as we anticipated. The next day, Madeline requested a private meeting. This isn't working, she said, her perfect composure showing tiny fractures. We both know it. On that we agree, I replied. We're prepared to negotiate our departure, she continued. For appropriate compensation, of course. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to pay you to leave? We want fair recognition of our contributions, she corrected. A reasonable settlement to avoid any unpleasantness. What kind of unpleasantness did you have in mind? Her smile turned cold. The board meets next week. We have evidence that you've been misrepresenting the company's financial position, that your personal vendetta against us is endangering Veracity's future. Evidence? Financial projections, client communications, design archives. She shrugged elegantly. It's amazing what people leave unprotected on company servers. I nodded slowly. I see. And your proposal? 2 years' salary each, plus a percentage of future revenues from collections developed during our tenure. In exchange, we leave quietly, with positive public statements all around. That's very generous of you, I said. I'll need time to consider. Not too much time, she warned. The board meeting is Tuesday. After she left, I sat in silence, staring at the small garden visible from my office window. Verity had planted it herself, choosing each flower for its resilience rather than its beauty. Blossoms that could withstand frost and drought, that returned year after year despite adversity. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I barely slept, working through the night to ensure everything was ready. By Monday evening, dark circles shadowed my eyes, but a strange calm had settled over me. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a suit I'd designed myself, severe in cut but with unexpected details visible only up close. Around my neck, I wore the pendant I'd made on my first day at Veracity, the silver seed breaking open. The board members arrived one by one, nodding politely but avoiding direct eye contact. The trio entered last, Madeline carrying a portfolio that presumably contained their evidence. They seated themselves opposite me, their confidence palpable. Thank you all for coming, I began. Before we address the agenda, I'd like to make an announcement. The room quieted. Yesterday, I finalized an agreement with the International Guild of Fine Jewelry Designers. They've selected Veracity to showcase our archives and current collections at their annual exhibition next month. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. The exhibition was by invitation only, a prestigious honor typically reserved for established houses with decades of history. Additionally, I continued, 3 of our newest pieces have been nominated for innovation awards. One board member leaned forward. That's extraordinary. Congratulations. Madeline's smile tightened. While accolades are wonderful, we have more pressing matters to discuss today. She opened her portfolio. Specifically, concerns about the company's current leadership and direction. For the next 20 minutes, she presented their case, charts showing projected losses based on my new direction, emails taken out of context to suggest I was alienating key partners. Design sketches they claimed showed a creative decline. When she finished, the room was silent. Board members glanced at each other, unsure how to proceed. Thank you, Madeline, I said. That was very thorough. I turned to the board. Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to offer a different perspective. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. On the screen appeared a simple graph, client retention rates over the past 2 years. When I left Veracity 7 months ago, client retention had dropped to an all-time low. I explained. Longtime customers were leaving, despite the trio's claims of increased profits. I clicked to the next slide. Detailed financial projections showing sustainable growth based on returning clients and new commissions. Short-term profit spikes are easy to achieve by cutting quality and raising prices. Sustainable growth requires client loyalty and word-of-mouth recommendations. For the next hour, I methodically dismantled their case, presenting evidence of how their leadership had damaged Veracity's reputation, alienated core clients, and compromised the quality that had been our hallmark. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to concern to outright alarm. But this isn't just about numbers, I said, reaching the end of my presentation. It's about integrity. About honoring Verity's vision. I paused, looking directly at the trio, and about honesty in how we conduct ourselves. I clicked to one final slide. These are files that were downloaded from my computer 3 days ago. Design archives, client lists, supplier contracts, everything needed to start a competing jewelry design company. Griffin's face flushed. That's absurd. Where's your proof? The files were watermarked, I said quietly, each with a unique digital signature that activates when copied. Standard practice for protecting intellectual property. Adeline laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. A desperate attempt to... Matt... To what? I interrupted. To protect the company Verity built? To prevent you from stealing what isn't yours? Again? The room fell silent. I don't want your resignations, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I don't want settlements or legal battles or public scandals. What do you want? Madeline asked, her voice barely audible. I smiled. I want you to stay. Confusion rippled through the room. The board members exchanged bewildered glances while the trio stared at me with naked suspicion. You want us to stay? Griffin repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. Absolutely, I said, closing my laptop. With a few adjustments to your current roles, of course. I turned to address the board. Verity believed in second chances, in learning from mistakes rather than simply punishing them. I'd like to honor that philosophy. Madeline's perfectly manicured nails drummed silently against the table, her eyes calculating. What exactly did you have in mind? Transparency, I replied. Complete transparency. Over the next hour, I outlined my proposal. Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin would remain at Veracity, but under a new arrangement. They would work directly with our artisans, learning the fundamentals of jewelry creation from the ground up. Their communication with clients and suppliers would be supervised. Their access to financial and design systems would be restricted. This is insulting, Adeline finally erupted. We're industry veterans, not apprentices. You're industry veterans who attempted to steal company property, I corrected. Who systematically sabotaged a colleague until she resigned. Who lied to a dying woman about her protégé. The room grew very still. Your choice is simple, I continued. Accept these terms, or face legal consequences for attempted theft of intellectual property. The board can decide which option better serves Veracity's interests. The vote was unanimous. The trio would stay, under my terms. As the meeting concluded, the board members filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact with their former allies. Madeline lingered, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the rage beneath. You won't get away with this, she hissed. People like you don't win against people like us. I studied her face, the perfect makeup, the practiced expressions, the carefully calculated intensity in her eyes. That's where you're wrong, I said quietly. People like me have already won. You just haven't realized it yet. The months that followed were a masterclass in controlled humiliation. Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin arrived each morning to find themselves assigned basic tasks that even our newest apprentices had mastered. They polished metals until their fingers cramped. They sorted gemstones by size and clarity. They learned to recognize the difference between work that was merely technically proficient and work that carried genuine emotion. They hated every minute of it. This is a waste of my expertise, Griffin complained during his 3rd week of basic metalwork training. Pierre, who had become my most trusted ally, regarded him with cool detachment. You claim expertise in jewelry, yet you cannot properly anneal silver without scorching it. Perhaps the waste is in your claims, not your assignment. They tried everything to escape their situation. Madeline attempted to rally the board for another vote of no confidence, only to discover that the evidence of their attempted theft had thoroughly eroded any remaining support. Adeline reached out to former clients, hoping to lure them away, only to find that those relationships had been permanently damaged during their tenure. Griffin explored legal options, but every attorney he consulted confirmed what Bartholomew had explained. They had signed contracts that allowed for reassignment of duties, and their attempted theft had given me legitimate cause for restricting their access. Throughout it all, I continued designing. The creative spark that had been nearly extinguished during my exile roared back to life. Each piece I created felt more honest, more deeply connected to its intended purpose than anything I'd made before. The international press took notice. Features in prestigious magazines described Veracity's renaissance under my leadership. Orders poured in faster than we could fulfill them. And still, the trio stayed. Pride prevented them from resigning. Greed kept them attached to their substantial salaries. Spite made them determined to outlast me, to find some way to reclaim control. 6 months after the board meeting, I received a call from the International Guild of Fine Jewelry Designers. 3 of my pieces had won their respective categories at the annual exhibition. The Guild was hosting a gala to celebrate the winners, with industry leaders and press from around the world in attendance. "Congratulations," Madeline said when she heard the news, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Quite an achievement." I studied her face, noting the new lines of strain around her mouth. "Thank you. I'd like all 3 of you to attend." Their surprise was evident. "You want us there?" Adeline asked suspiciously. "Of course," I replied. "You're still senior partners after all. It would look strange if you weren't present for such an important company event." The night of the gala arrived. The trio appeared in designer formal wear, clearly intending to present themselves as key figures in Veracity's success. I greeted them cordially, introducing them to guild officials and industry journalists as valuable members of our production team. Each time, their smiles grew more strained. As dinner concluded, the guild president approached our table. "Miss Wesley, we'd like to present your awards now. Would you and your team join me on stage?" I nodded, turning to Pierre and 2 other master artisans who had helped refine my winning designs. "Shall we?" Madeline cleared her throat. "Shouldn't we join you as well, as senior partners?" The guild president looked confused. "I was under the impression these were your primary collaborators," he said, gesturing to Pierre and the others. "They absolutely are," I confirmed. "Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin handle more administrative aspects of production." The humiliation was subtle but complete. They remained at the table, watching as I accepted the awards alongside the artisans who had truly contributed to the design's success. Later that evening, as guests mingled during the reception, I overheard a conversation between Griffin and the creative director of a rival jewelry house. "Must be challenging," the director was saying, "working under someone you once supervised." Griffin's response was tight. "Temporary arrangement. Market conditions, you understand." "Of course," the director nodded, clearly not believing him. "Though I must say, Wesley's work is extraordinary. That pendant with the interlocking elements, revolutionary approach to movement and light." As I moved through the crowd, similar conversations echoed around me. The trio's reputation was transforming before my eyes, from respected industry veterans to ambiguous background figures in Veracity's resurgence. The following Monday, they requested a meeting. "This isn't working," Madeline stated flatly, no longer bothering with her perfect smile. "The arrangement is unsustainable." "I'm listening," I said. "We want out," Griffin said bluntly. "Clean break. No non-compete clauses." I considered them carefully. "You understand that without non-compete agreements, you forfeit any severance beyond your final month's salary." "We understand," Adeline replied tersely. "Then I accept your resignations, effective immediately." They left that afternoon, clearing their desks under Pierre's watchful eye. No goodbyes, no well wishes, just the quiet closing of the glass doors behind them. 1 week later, industry news reported their new venture, Triad Luxury Jewelry, backed by significant investor funding. Their launch collection was scheduled to debut in 3 months at an exclusive preview event. "Aren't you concerned?" Bartholomew asked during our monthly legal review. "They have connections, resources. They could become serious competitors." I smiled. "I'm counting on it." The day of Triad's launch arrived. Their preview event was held at an upscale hotel ballroom, with carefully curated guest lists and strict security. Through a colleague who had been invited, I received photographs of their collection. The designs were technically impressive, complex, elaborate, visually striking. They showcased expensive materials and intricate techniques. On paper, they should have been spectacular, but something was missing. 2 days later, the first reviews appeared. Critics praised the technical execution but noted a strange disconnect. The pieces didn't move naturally with the body. They photographed beautifully but felt awkward when worn. They impressed at first glance but didn't invite deeper connection. They never understood, Pierre observed as we reviewed the coverage. Jewelry isn't just about what you see. It's about what you feel when you wear it. Over the following months, Triad's trajectory became clear. Their initial splash attracted attention and investment, but client retention proved elusive. People bought their pieces as status symbols, but didn't develop the emotional connection that turned first-time buyers into loyal clients. Meanwhile, Veracity continued to thrive. We expanded thoughtfully, adding new artisans trained in our philosophy of honoring the wearer. We opened a second location focused on teaching jewelry design to young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. We launched a collection specifically designed for clients with physical disabilities, creating pieces that worked with their bodies rather than despite them. 1 year after the trio's departure, I received an invitation to speak at the National Design Conference. My topic, Authenticity as Competitive Advantage. As I stood at the podium, looking out over hundreds of industry professionals, I spotted them in the audience, Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin, seated together near the back. Their company was struggling, industry gossip suggested. Investors were growing impatient. Expenses outpaced revenues. True design isn't about decoration, I began. It's about understanding, about empathy, about creating something that becomes part of someone's identity rather than merely an accessory to it. I spoke for 45 minutes about Veracity's philosophy, about Verity's legacy, about the difference between jewelry that impresses and jewelry that connects. Throughout, the trio watched with expressions that shifted between disdain and reluctant recognition. As the audience applauded at my conclusion, I made eye contact with Madeline. For just a moment, I saw something unexpected in her gaze, not hatred or anger, but a flicker of genuine regret. That night, back in my hotel room, I finally opened the envelope I'd been carrying for months. Inside was Verity's last letter to me, delivered by Bartholomew after her will had been executed. Rhiannon, it began, if you're reading this, then you've reclaimed what was always yours, what I never should have allowed to be taken. Her handwriting was shaky but determined. I knew what they were doing to you. Not at first. The treatments clouded my mind, and they were careful around me. But Pierre saw. He told me everything. By then, you were gone, and I was too weak to fix it directly. My throat tightened as I continued reading. So, I made a different plan. I left you Veracity, not as compensation for what you suffered, but because it was always meant to be yours. You understand what I built it for. Not profit or prestige, but connection. The ability to translate human experience into something tangible. Tears blurred my vision. Don't waste your life on revenge, dear one. It's too precious for that. Instead, build something they could never understand. A legacy of work that matters, that touches lives, that remains when we are gone. They will destroy themselves without your help. People who create nothing of true value always do. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. In that moment, I finally understood. My revenge wasn't in humiliating them at board meetings or relegating them to basic tasks or even watching their new venture struggle. It wasn't in anything I had done to them at all. My revenge was in surviving them, in thriving despite them, in creating work of genuine value while they chased hollow prestige. They had tried to destroy me because they couldn't understand me. They had seen my approach to design as naive, my connection to clients as inefficient, my commitment to quality as impractical. They had tried to replace something authentic with something that merely looked impressive, and they had failed. 3 years after that terrible day when I'd walked out of Veracity with my belongings in a cardboard box, I stood in our expanded workshop, watching 20 artisans transform raw materials into pieces that would become part of their wearers' life stories. Our waiting list stretched 6 months. Our client retention rate exceeded 90%. Our pieces weren't just worn, they were treasured, passed down, woven into family narratives. Meanwhile, Triad Luxury Jewelry filed for bankruptcy protection. Their investors pulled out. Their elaborate showroom closed. Their technically impressive but emotionally empty pieces were liquidated at industry auctions. The ultimate revenge wasn't in destroying them. It was in building something they could never replicate, something authentic, connected, and genuinely valuable, something that would outlast all of us. The last I heard, Madeline had taken a teaching position at a design school, perhaps finally understanding that technique without heart is ultimately empty. Adeline had joined a large commercial jewelry manufacturer, applying her knowledge of trends to mass-produced pieces. Griffin had left the industry entirely. And me? I continued creating. Not for revenge or validation or even success, but because it was the language my soul spoke most fluently. Each piece that left our workshop carried a small part of my story, of falling and rising, of breaking and mending, of loss and reclamation. The most powerful revenge, I discovered, wasn't in making others suffer. It was in refusing to let their actions define my story. It was in transforming pain into beauty, humiliation into strength, endings into beginnings. It was in understanding what they never could, that true value lies not in how something looks, but in how it connects. Not in its price, but in its meaning. Not in its ability to impress, but in its capacity to matter. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or forced out of something you built, I hope this story reminds you that other people's actions don't define your worth. The most powerful response to those who try to diminish you isn't hatred, it's excellence. What revenge stories have inspired you? Share in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation. Remember, sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is simply to succeed in ways they never imagined possible. The black screen of my iPhone mirrored my boss's darkening expression as it skidded across the polished marble. Time slowed while 22 executives stopped breathing. My hand hung empty where the device had been seconds before. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the presentation room, interrupting the CEO's question about the quarterly projections. "You're fired," Gareth said, voice tight and low. "Clean out your desk." Not a single person moved. Not the regional directors, not the marketing team, not even the CEO himself, Preston, who'd been mid-sip of water when my phone clattered at his expensive shoes. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" I managed, my voice barely audible. Gareth stepped forward, positioning himself between me and Preston. "You heard me. This level of unprofessionalism is unacceptable. We don't need this kind of embarrassment." "It was an accident," I said, bending to retrieve my phone, noticing the new crack spreading across its screen like a lightning bolt. "Please leave the premises immediately," Gareth continued, "or I'll have security escort you out." The room remained frozen. 22 faces stared, some confused, some uncomfortable, none intervening. I'd spent 4 years at this company, built the entire digital marketing strategy from nothing, increased conversion rates by 217%, and now I was being terminated for dropping a phone. "Mr. Vaughn," I addressed the CEO directly. "I apologize for the interruption." Preston opened his mouth, but Gareth cut him off. "This meeting will reconvene in 15 minutes, Gareth announced. "Everyone take a break." As the executives shuffled out, I noticed something peculiar. Preston was studying Gareth with narrowed eyes, his head tilted slightly. At my desk, I mechanically placed personal items into a cardboard box. A small potted jade plant, a framed photo of my mother, an ergonomic wrist rest. 4 years reduced to a single box. Liv from Human Resources approached with termination papers. Her eyes darted nervously. "This isn't right," she whispered. "Everyone knows this isn't right." I signed where indicated, noting my hands weren't shaking. I felt oddly calm, disconnected from reality. "Your final paycheck will be deposited next Friday," Liv said formally. "Please surrender your access card." I handed it over, trying to calculate how long my savings would last. 2 months of rent? 3? Not enough for Mom's medication beyond that. As I walked toward the elevator, Gareth appeared, smiling thinly. "You should have stayed in your lane, Nayla," he said, voice silky. Some people aren't built for this level. The elevator doors closed on his smug face. In my car, I gripped the steering wheel and finally allowed myself to breathe. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not when I was so close to the promotion. Not when Mom's treatment was showing progress. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Nayla Choi? This is Preston Vaughn. My heart stopped. I'd like to speak with you about what happened today, the CEO continued. Are you available to meet? 2 hours later, I sat across from Preston in his hotel suite while he asked questions nobody had ever bothered to ask before. About reporting structures, about team dynamics, about how certain projects were assigned and credited. When I returned to my apartment, a text notification appeared. Gareth wanted to meet. Urgently. Before I continue this story, if you're enjoying it so far, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in Nayla's journey. My name is Nayla Choi, and until today, I was the digital strategy director at a multinational marketing firm. I'm 32, live alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and spend most weekends visiting my mother at Silver Pines Recovery Center, where she's slowly healing from a stroke that nearly took her life last year. I was never supposed to be in that meeting with the CEO. Junior directors weren't typically included in executive presentations, but 3 days ago, Gareth had suddenly insisted I attend. You'll hold the clicker and advance the slides, he'd instructed. Don't speak unless directly addressed. Wear something appropriate. It should have been my first warning sign. I'd been watching Gareth operate for 4 years. He had a particular method. Identify talented team members, extract their best ideas, present them as his own, then gradually push those same people out of the company. I'd survived by making myself indispensable, by knowing systems and clients better than anyone else. 6 months ago, I'd created a revolutionary algorithmic approach to client acquisition that increased new business by 40%. When the quarterly numbers came in, Gareth presented the strategy to the board as his brainchild. I said nothing. I needed the job, needed the health insurance for Mom, but something changed last month. I caught Gareth examining the figures from my latest campaign, erasing my name from the reports. Later that week, he hired Bryce, a fresh MBA graduate with connections to the board. Suddenly, Bryce was included in meetings I was excluded from. The day before the CEO's visit, I overheard Gareth and Bryce talking in the break room. Once we transition Nayla's accounts to you next month, you'll be perfectly positioned for the director promotion, Gareth said. What about Nayla? Bryce asked. Don't worry about her, Gareth replied. I've been documenting performance issues for weeks. It's all arranged. I'd spent that night updating my resume, knowing my days were numbered, but I never expected it would happen like this. So publicly, so humiliatingly. What Gareth couldn't have known was that I'd noticed something during the presentation. The quarterly figures he was showing Preston were completely fabricated. The growth wasn't 22% as he claimed, it was barely 7%. And the new client acquisition numbers? Pure fantasy. My shock at seeing these falsified figures was what made my grip loosen. The phone didn't slip because I was nervous meeting the CEO. It slipped because I was witnessing a crime. And now, as I watched Gareth's car pull into the visitor parking space outside my apartment, I wondered, what did Preston tell him after I left? Why was Gareth here, knocking on my door with the desperate energy of a drowning man? I took a deep breath and turned the handle. Gareth pushed past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. His cologne filled my small living room, cloying and expensive. What did you tell Preston? He demanded, pacing on my faded area rug. Exactly what happened, I replied, keeping the door open. You fired me for dropping my phone. Gareth stopped pacing. Don't play stupid, Nayla. He called me right after speaking with you. What else did you discuss? I closed the door slowly, weighing my options. He asked about company operations, team dynamics, normal CEO curiosity. Did you show him anything? Any files or emails? I noticed sweat beading at his temples despite the cool temperature in my apartment. Why would I have company files? I was escorted out, remember? Gareth's eyes darted to my laptop on the coffee table. Preston mentioned a special meeting tomorrow morning. Just you, him, and the board. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. Preston had mentioned no such meeting. I wasn't aware of that, I said carefully. Listen to me very carefully. Gareth stepped closer, lowering his voice. Whatever you think you know means nothing. Preston and I go back 20 years. He was my mentor at business school. One word from me, and you won't just lose this job. You'll be unhireable anywhere that matters. The threat hung between us, tangible as a third person in the room. Is that all? I asked, moving toward the door. Gareth smiled, confidence returning. Preston's testing your loyalty. It's what he does with promising talent. If you pass, there might still be a place for you. If you fail, he shrugged. Well, your mother's care is expensive, isn't it? As he brushed past me, he whispered. Smart people know when to stay quiet, Nayla. The door closed behind him, and I sank onto my couch, mind racing. Was Gareth telling the truth about his relationship with Preston? Was this all an elaborate test? Or was Gareth desperately trying to save himself? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hotel Westwood, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Private dining room. Come alone. PV. I stared at the message for a long time, calculating risks and possibilities. By morning, I would need to make a decision that would alter the course of my entire future, and my mother's care hung in the balance. What I didn't know then was that Gareth had already set another plan in motion, one that would make our confrontation tomorrow far more dangerous than I could possibly imagine. Sleep avoided me that night. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by notes and printouts I'd secretly gathered over months. Call it paranoia or instinct, but I'd been keeping records of Gareth's inconsistencies since the day he took credit for my first major campaign. My phone pinged with a message from Liv. Heard what happened. This isn't right. Need anything? I hesitated before responding. Liv had always been kind, but company loyalty typically trumped personal connections. I'm okay, thanks for asking. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Gareth's freaking out. Called emergency meeting after you left. Never seen him like this. My pulse quickened. What happened? Don't know details, but Preston stayed behind after everyone left. Closed door meeting for over an hour. I set my phone down, mind racing. Whatever Gareth and Preston discussed had clearly rattled my former boss enough to drive to my apartment with threats. At 3 a.m., I called the only person who always gave me straight answers. My mother. Baby girl, she answered, voice heavy with sleep, but instantly alert. What's wrong? I told her everything. The firing, Preston's call, Gareth's visit. Do you have proof? Mom asked when I finished. Even weakened by her stroke, her mind remained razor sharp. Some, not enough. Then you need leverage, she said simply. Find something they need more than they need you to stay quiet. What if I'm walking into a trap tomorrow? Her laugh was soft. Nayla, you've been supporting us since you were 19 when your father left. You navigated me through a stroke and insurance nightmares. You think some corporate boys can outmaneuver you? After we hung up, I turned to my laptop. If I was meeting Preston tomorrow, I needed more than suspicions. I logged into my personal cloud storage, where I'd backed up key documents. Not stolen company files, I wasn't that reckless, but my own work products and communications that painted a clear picture when assembled properly. By dawn, I had prepared a simple presentation. Nothing dramatic, just facts arranged in a sequence that told a story even a CEO flying between dozens of subsidiaries could understand quickly. The Hotel Westwood's lobby gleamed with quiet luxury at 6:50 a.m. I adjusted my blazer, conscious that I was wearing the same outfit from yesterday. The receptionist directed me to a private dining room overlooking the city. Preston was already there, drinking coffee and reading from a tablet. He looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable. Miss Choi, thank you for coming. Thank you for reaching out, I replied, taking the seat he indicated. A server appeared with coffee, then discreetly vanished. Preston set his tablet aside. Yesterday was unusual, he began. In 30 years of business, I've never seen an executive fire someone for dropping a phone. I stayed silent, waiting. After our conversation, I spoke with Gareth at length. He provided a different narrative. Claimed your performance has been declining for months, that the phone incident was merely the final straw. My stomach tightened. So, Gareth had already positioned his defense. And what do you think? I asked. Preston studied me carefully. I think it's strange that our best-performing region would suddenly have declining metrics under the same leadership that built it. He slid his tablet toward me. On the screen was a comparison of quarterly reports, the actual numbers alongside the ones Gareth had presented. These discrepancies are concerning, Preston continued. But more concerning is why a regional director would falsify them. Have you asked him? Of course. He claims these are reporting errors from your department. The blood rushed to my face. Of course he would blame me. The newly fired employee who couldn't defend herself. Mr. Vaughn, He held up a hand. Before you respond, I should tell you that I've temporarily suspended Gareth pending an investigation. I blinked in surprise. This isn't just about dropped phones or numerical discrepancies, Preston continued. After our meeting, I spoke with several team members. The picture they painted was troubling. What did they say? I asked, heart pounding. That's not important right now. What's important is what you can tell me. I need to understand what's been happening in that office. I reached for my bag, removing my laptop. I think it's better if I show you. For the next hour, I walked Preston through my presentation. Email trails showing my work mysteriously appearing under Gareth's name. Client feedback addressed to me that had been redacted in official reports. Timestamp discrepancies showing projects reassigned after successful completion. Preston asked pointed questions, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he was silent for several minutes. Miss Choi, are you aware of the quarterly leadership meeting scheduled for this afternoon? I shook my head. All regional directors and executive staff will be there, he continued, including Gareth. My throat went dry. I see. I'd like you to attend, but I've been fired. Consider that decision under review. Preston's expression softened slightly. This puts you in a difficult position, I know, but I need someone who understands these operations from the inside. What exactly would you need me to do? Simply be present. I'll handle the rest. He checked his watch. The meeting begins at 2 p.m. That gives us time to prepare. As I gathered my things, Preston added, one more thing. Gareth mentioned your mother's health situation. Is that a concern in this matter? The question caught me off guard. My mother had a stroke last year. Her treatment is expensive. And your health insurance terminated with your employment yesterday. It wasn't a question. I nodded, stomach sinking at the reminder. I'll have HR reinstated immediately, retroactive to yesterday. Whatever happens next, your mother's care shouldn't be collateral damage. I swallowed hard. Thank you. Outside the hotel, I called Mom with the update. I think it might work out, I told her. Of course it will, she replied. You're a Choi woman. We don't break. We rebuild. At 1:30 p.m., I parked in the company lot, feeling strangely detached as I swiped the temporary access card Preston had arranged. The security guard did a double take when he saw me. Miss Choi? Thought you'd left us. Just temporarily, I replied, summoning a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me time to settle my nerves. When the doors opened, Liv was waiting, eyes wide. Nayla, what are you doing here? She whispered, falling into step beside me. Preston invited me to the quarterly meeting. Her eyebrows shot up. Gareth is telling everyone you're trying to sue for wrongful termination. He's been in his office all morning with legal. That explained the panicked text messages I'd been ignoring from unknown numbers all morning. Is he in the conference room already? I asked. No, but the other directors are. It's tense in there. As we approached the conference room, Bryce emerged from Gareth's office, stopping abruptly when he saw me. You've got nerve showing up here, he said, blocking my path. I was invited, I replied evenly. By who? Legal? Because they're the only ones you'll be talking to after the stunt you pulled. Before I could respond, Preston rounded the corner with two men I recognized from the board of directors. Ah, Miss Choi, glad you could make it, Preston said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Please, join us in the conference room. Bryce's face drained of color as he stepped aside. Inside, conversation halted as I entered with Preston. 14 regional directors stared in confusion. I took a seat near the door, feeling their eyes on me. Minutes later, Gareth strode in, stopping mid-step when he saw me. For a split second, naked panic flashed across his face before his professional mask slipped back into place. Sir, I wasn't aware former employees would be joining us, he said to Preston, voice tight. Preston smiled pleasantly. I invited Miss Choi personally. Shall we begin? Gareth took his position at the head of the table, shuffling papers with trembling hands. As he launched into his presentation about quarterly performance, I noticed several directors exchanging glances. 20 minutes in, as Gareth clicked to a slide showing a 27% growth in new business, Preston cleared his throat. Gareth, I'm a bit confused by these figures. They don't match what I received from accounting this morning. The room went completely silent. There must be some mistake, Gareth said, smile faltering. My team prepared these directly from the source data. That's interesting, Preston replied, because I have the source data right here. He slid printed spreadsheets across the table. Perhaps you could explain the discrepancy? As the directors examined the papers, murmurs broke out around the room. These numbers aren't even close, someone whispered. Gareth's face reddened. There's obviously been a clerical error. My assistant must have… Your assistant confirmed she never touched these figures, Preston interrupted. In fact, she had quite a few interesting things to say this morning. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. I sat perfectly still, watching the scene unfold. "Sir," Gareth said, voice strained, "perhaps we should discuss this privately after the meeting." "I think not," Preston replied. "You see, I've spent the morning speaking with several team members. The picture they've painted is concerning, to say the least." Preston turned to me. "Miss Choi, would you mind joining me up here?" Heart pounding, I moved to the front of the room. Gareth's eyes followed me, his expression hardening into something dangerous. "Yesterday," Preston addressed the room, "I witnessed something unusual. Miss Choi was fired on the spot for accidentally dropping her phone during a presentation. At the time, I found it disproportionate. Now I understand it was merely the latest in a pattern of behavior designed to remove anyone who might threaten certain arrangements." Gareth's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. "Mr. Vaughn," he said, voice low, "whatever she's told you is the desperate fabrication of a terminated employee." "Is it?" Preston asked mildly. "Because I haven't told you what she said yet." The tension in the room was unbearable as Preston reached for his briefcase. Whatever he was about to reveal would change everything, and Gareth knew it. As the briefcase clicked open, Gareth suddenly lunged toward me, eyes wild with desperation. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You have no idea what you've done." Security guards appeared instantly, restraining Gareth before he could reach me. His sudden movement had knocked over a water pitcher, sending liquid cascading across the polished table and onto several directors' laps. "Get your hands off me!" Gareth shouted, struggling against the guards. "Do you know who I am?" Preston remained perfectly calm. "I know exactly who you are, Gareth. That's the problem." As the guards escorted Gareth back to his seat, I noticed the room had transformed. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Every person present sensed they were witnessing something momentous. "Now," Preston continued, removing a thick folder from his briefcase, "let's discuss what we've learned." For the next 30 minutes, Preston methodically outlined what my presentation had only hinted at. Financial reports showing discrepancies dating back 18 months. Client communications that had been altered before reaching upper management. Projects reassigned after completion to show different leadership. With each revelation, Gareth seemed to physically shrink in his chair. "Most concerning," Preston said, turning to a final set of documents. "Are these approval forms for bonus distributions? Notice anything unusual, directors?" The papers circulated around the table. One by one, faces registered shock, then anger. "These signatures aren't mine," said Talia, the Midwest director. "I never approved redirecting my team's performance bonuses." "Mine either," added Damon from the Western region. "That's because," Preston explained, "someone has been systematically redirecting bonus allocations from high-performing teams to a select few individuals." He glanced at Bryce, who suddenly found the floor fascinating, creating the impression that certain teams were outperforming others, when in fact, the opposite was true. Gareth's voice cut through the murmurs. "This is a witch hunt. Where's your proof I had anything to do with this?" Preston smiled thinly. "I haven't accused you specifically, Gareth. Interesting that you jumped to that conclusion." He nodded to his assistant, who distributed another set of documents. "These are authorization codes used to access the compensation system. Each code is unique to an individual user." The room fell silent as everyone read the logs, showing Gareth's credentials used to modify bonus allocations 19 separate times over the past year. "This is impossible," Gareth sputtered. "Someone must have stolen my credentials." "An interesting theory," Preston replied, "which is why I asked it to pull the access records." He turned to a new page. "Every entry was made from your office computer, during business hours, on days when keycard records show you were present." Gareth's face went ashen. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, finding none. "There's been a mistake," he insisted, voice cracking. "I was set up." Preston turned to me. "Miss Choi, yesterday morning before the presentation, did you notice anything unusual about your seating arrangement?" I nodded, remembering. Gareth changed the seating chart last minute. He insisted on standing directly behind me during the presentation. "And the phone you dropped, whose idea was it for you to hold it during the presentation?" "Gareth's. He said I needed to advance the slides, despite the fact that we have remote clickers specifically for that purpose," Preston added. The Midwest director leaned forward. "Wait, are you saying he planned for her to drop the phone?" "Not exactly," Preston replied. "Miss Choi, what did you notice during the presentation that might have caused you to lose your grip?" I took a deep breath. The figures Gareth was presenting didn't match anything I'd seen in our actual reports. The growth wasn't 22% as he claimed, it was barely 7%. I was shocked when I realized the numbers were completely fabricated. And at that moment, I felt someone bump my elbow from behind. That's when I dropped my phone. All eyes turned to Gareth, who had gone completely still. "Does anyone else recall this?" Preston asked the room. Liv spoke up from the corner where she'd been quietly taking notes. "I saw it." Gareth kept inching closer behind Nayla throughout the presentation. When she paused at the third quarter projections, he definitely made contact with her arm. Another voice chimed in, Tasha from reception. "I saw it too. I was bringing in additional water pitchers." He was watching her like a hawk the entire time, and definitely moved forward just before her phone fell. "This is absurd," Gareth protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Preston closed his folder deliberately. "Gareth, effective immediately. Your position with this company is terminated. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." The room erupted in whispers. Gareth stood, straightening his tie with trembling hands. "You're making a massive mistake," he said, voice low. "I built this region from nothing." "Did you?" Preston asked mildly. "The numbers suggest otherwise." As security moved toward him, Gareth looked directly at me, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over, Nayla." Once Gareth was escorted out, Preston addressed the remaining directors. "We'll take a 30-minute break. When we return, we'll discuss restructuring and next steps." People filed out, casting curious glances my way. Preston approached me quietly. "That went as expected," he said. "How are you holding up?" "Still processing," I admitted. "I never thought it would end like this." "It's not quite over," Preston replied. "There's the matter of your position to discuss." During the break, directors approached me one by one, offering support and apologies for not speaking up sooner. Many admitted they'd witnessed Gareth's behavior, but feared retaliation. The pattern had been clear to everyone except those with the power to stop it. When the meeting reconvened, Preston announced an immediate audit of all departments to identify any other discrepancies. Then he turned to me. "Nayla Choi has demonstrated exceptional integrity under difficult circumstances," he told the group. "I'm creating a new position, Director of Operational Integrity, reporting directly to me. Ms. Choi will oversee implementation of new transparency protocols across all regions." The announcement was met with approving nods. After the meeting adjourned, directors lined up to congratulate me. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I caught glimpses of Gareth being escorted through the office, cardboard box in hand, employees watching in stunned silence. As the day wound down, I found myself alone in my old office, soon to be my new office, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Liv stood there holding a small plant. "Thought your jade plant might want to come home." I smiled, taking it from her. "Thanks. It's been a day." "That's an understatement." She hesitated. "There's something you should know, something I couldn't say in front of everyone." My smile faded. "What is it?" The night before the CEO's visit, I overheard Gareth on the phone with someone. He said, "Once she's gone, we'll have complete control over the allocation system. No one will question the numbers." I set the plant down carefully. "Did you catch who he was speaking with?" Liv nodded. "That's why I couldn't say anything earlier. It was Preston's executive assistant, Anthony." My blood ran cold. "Anthony? Are you sure?" "Positive. They mentioned meeting for drinks later to finalize arrangements." I thanked Liv for the information. Mind racing. If Preston's assistant was involved, how deep did this conspiracy go? Was Preston himself aware? Was my new position just another trap? After Liv left, I sat alone, weighing my options. The smart move would be to accept the promotion, keep my head down, and protect my career. But something inside me rebelled at the thought of letting corruption continue at a higher level. I pulled out my phone and dialed Preston's direct line, which he'd given me that morning. "Mr. Vaughn, there's something important we need to discuss. About your assistant, Anthony." There was a long pause before Preston replied, "I was wondering when you'd figure that part out." "You knew?" "Not until this morning. Anthony has been reassigned, effective immediately." Relief washed over me. "So it's really over?" "Not quite," Preston said. "Meet me in the parking garage in 15 minutes. There's one more thing we need to address." In the dimly lit garage, Preston was waiting beside his car, expression grave. "What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this conversation," he said, handing me a tablet. On the screen was an email chain between Gareth and someone named PV. discussing ways to artificially inflate regional numbers. The most recent message was dated just 2 days ago. My heart sank. PV. Preston Vaughn? You were part of this? Preston's expression remained unreadable. Keep reading. I scrolled through more messages, confusion mounting. These weren't Preston's words or writing style. Then I noticed a detail. The email signature included a middle initial, Patrick V. Williams. The board's vice chairman, I breathed. Gareth was working with Patrick Williams, not you. Preston nodded grimly. Gareth thought he had protection at the highest level. That's why he was so confident in firing you publicly. He believed Williams would shield him. Does Williams know you've discovered this? Not yet. That meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I handed the tablet back, mind reeling with implications. Why are you telling me this? Preston smiled for the first time that day. Because when Williams tries to paint this as a misunderstanding tomorrow, I need a witness who understands exactly what happened. As we parted ways, I realized the true extent of my revenge against Gareth. It wasn't just about getting my job back or seeing him fired. It was about dismantling the entire corrupt system he'd built, piece by piece, all the way to the top. The next morning, when I walked into the boardroom alongside Preston to face Patrick Williams, I felt no fear, only certainty that justice would finally be served. If you've made it this far in Nayla's journey, please hit the like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed workplace injustice like this? Subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over adversity, because sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's rising above. $15 million. His voice boomed across the medical billing floor like a war cry. Every conversation stopped. Every keyboard went silent. You've been stealing from our clients, billing for services that never existed, and I have the proof right here. I felt 30 faces turn toward me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. My supervisor, Garrett, stood behind my chair waving a thick folder above his head like some kind of trophy. His face had turned that particular shade of red that meant he'd rehearsed this moment in his bathroom mirror. This lawsuit will ruin you completely, he continued, his voice carrying that theatrical edge he used during team meetings. Security is on their way up to escort you out permanently. You're finished in this industry. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. I could hear Melody from accounting whisper something to her neighbor. Someone's chair squeaked. The copy machine hummed in the background, completely unaware that my entire world was supposedly crumbling. But here's the thing about moments like this. They reveal who you really are. I stayed seated. My fingers found their familiar rhythm against the desk surface, a steady drumbeat that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. A smile started at the corner of my mouth, the kind that comes from knowing something nobody else does. Before we make any dramatic moves, I said, my voice cutting through his performance like a knife through butter, maybe you'd like to see what I've been keeping safe in here. I reached for my bottom desk drawer. The change in Garrett's face was instant. All that manufactured rage drained away like water from a broken dam. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The folder in his hands trembled just enough for me to notice. What are you doing? He asked, but his voice had lost all its thunder. My hand rested on the drawer handle. Just thought you might want to know what I do in my spare time. The entire department leaned forward without realizing it. Garrett took a step back. 3 months ago, I'd been just another face in this sterile office, processing medical claims and wondering why some procedures generated such unusually high insurance payouts. Patients I'd never heard of. Treatments that seemed too expensive. And most interesting of all, my supervisor's sudden ability to afford a luxury sports car on a manager's salary. But instead of reporting him like any normal person would do, I'd done something else entirely. I'd applied for a different kind of job. The State Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit had been thrilled to have someone willing to work from the inside. Within 2 weeks, I was living a double life, processing bills during the day, feeding information to investigators at night. Every fake patient account Garrett created, every inflated procedure he approved, every dollar he thought he was stealing, I'd been tracking it all. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part was what I'd been doing with his money. Each time Garrett siphoned funds from those insurance overpayments, each time he thought he was building his secret fortune, I'd been making sure those exact amounts ended up somewhere he'd never expect. A victim compensation fund managed by the state. He'd been working overtime, staying late, processing more fraudulent claims than ever before, convinced he was getting rich. He had no idea he'd been funding his own victims' recovery accounts. The lawsuit he'd just announced, that was supposed to be his grand finale. Frame me for everything. Claim I was the mastermind behind the fraud, then disappear with his hidden money before anyone could investigate properly. My drawer slid open with a soft whisper. I pulled out a single business card and held it up so everyone could see. The state seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division, I announced clearly. Special Investigator. That's actually my job title here. Garrett's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of my desk to steady himself. Every transaction you've processed in the last 90 days has been monitored and reversed, I continued, standing up slowly. That $700,000 you think you've stolen? It's been sitting in a state-controlled account, earning interest for the people you hurt. The office remained frozen in absolute silence. Oh, and that beautiful new car you bought last month? I smiled wider. Purchased with state funds as part of our investigation. We own it now. His hands started shaking. But here's my absolute favorite part, I said, savoring every word like fine wine. Remember all those extra hours you put in? All those weekends you spent here, staying late to process those high-value fake claims? You were so dedicated, so thorough. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You built the most complete fraud case our department has ever assembled. Against yourself. 2 people in plain clothes stepped off the elevator. They'd been waiting in the lobby all morning. One of them held up a badge. The warrant was signed at 9 this morning, he announced. All accounts frozen. All assets seized. As they began reading Garrett his rights, I gathered my personal items from the desk. My actual supervisor from the fraud division appeared beside me. Someone Garrett had never met. Outstanding work, she said quietly. He generated enough material to put himself away for 20 years. The insurance companies are calling this the cleanest operation they've ever witnessed. I looked back at Garrett one more time. He was staring at the handcuffs, finally understanding that every single move he'd made had been planned by me. The beautiful irony? I called out as they led him toward the elevator. You actually were stealing $15 million. You just never got to keep a single penny of it. But wait, let me tell you how this really started. Because the woman who just destroyed Garrett's life wasn't always this calculating. My name is Raven, and 6 months ago, I was a completely different person. If you're loving this story of ultimate workplace revenge, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever suspected someone at work of stealing? Because what I discovered next will blow your mind. I used to believe in playing by the rules. I used to think that hard work and loyalty would eventually pay off. I used to trust that people in authority positions had earned their power through merit. That was before I met Garrett. 6 months earlier, I'd been working as a medical billing specialist at a mid-sized healthcare administration company. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was good at it. Really good. I could spot discrepancies in insurance claims faster than anyone else in the department, and I took pride in making sure healthcare providers got paid accurately for their services. Garrett had been my supervisor for about 8 months when I first noticed something odd. A patient named Vincent had supposedly received a series of expensive cardiac procedures at a clinic across town. The total billing came to nearly $40,000, which wasn't unusual for heart surgery. But when I cross-referenced the patient information with the clinic's records, something didn't match up. Vincent's address led to an empty lot. His phone number was disconnected. His insurance information was valid, but when I called the insurance company, they had no record of authorizing those procedures. I brought it to Garrett's attention during our weekly review meeting. Must be a clerical error, he said without even looking at the file. These things happen. Just process it through. But it kept happening. More patients with questionable addresses, more procedures that seemed too convenient, more insurance payouts that made my instincts scream that something was wrong. The breaking point came when I discovered a patient who'd supposedly received a kidney transplant, while the same patient was listed as having received a different kidney transplant at another facility 3 weeks earlier. Unless this person had been born with 3 kidneys, someone was lying. When I brought this to Garrett again, his response was different. Raven, he said, closing my file without reading it, you're being overly cautious. These medical facilities know what they're doing. Our job is to process claims, not to play detective. That's when I knew for certain something was wrong. Because any legitimate supervisor would want to investigate potential fraud. Any honest manager would be concerned about processing false claims. But Garrett wanted me to stop looking too closely at the details, so I started watching him instead. I became a student of Garrett's habits. I arrived early and stayed late, not to impress him, but to observe him. I watched which files he accessed when he thought nobody was around. I paid attention to which phone calls he took behind closed doors. I noticed when he started wearing expensive watches and driving a car that cost more than twice his annual salary. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in late February. I'd told everyone I was leaving for the day, but instead I'd hidden in the supply closet down the hall. Through the gap in the door, I watched Garrett return to his office after the cleaning crew had finished their rounds. He spent the next 2 hours working on something that definitely wasn't part of his regular duties. I could see him typing, printing pages, and making phone calls in hushed tones. When he finally left, I waited another 30 minutes before slipping back into the office. His computer was locked, but Garrett had made a crucial mistake. He'd left a printed email on his desk, probably planning to shred it in the morning. The email was from someone named Craig at a medical clinic, thanking Garrett for processing the Patterson account so quickly and mentioning that the usual split will be transferred by Friday. Patterson was one of the patients I'd flagged as suspicious. I photographed the email with my phone and started digging deeper into the Patterson file the next morning. What I found made my stomach turn. Patterson had supposedly received a series of cancer treatments totaling $68,000, but when I called the clinic directly, they had no record of anyone by that name ever being treated there. The insurance company had already paid out the full amount. That's when I realized the scope of what Garrett was doing. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing money that was supposed to help sick people. Every fake claim he processed meant real patients somewhere else might have their legitimate treatments denied due to increased fraud prevention measures. But confronting him directly would have been useless. Garrett was too smart to leave obvious traces, and he had administrative access to systems I couldn't touch. If I reported him through normal channels, he'd have time to destroy anything incriminating and probably find a way to blame me for whatever investigators discovered. That's when I had an idea that would have seemed impossible to the old Raven. I started researching the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division. They had a website with information about their ongoing cases and how they operated. What caught my attention was a section about undercover operations and how they sometimes worked with inside informants in suspected fraud rings. I spent a week crafting the perfect application. I emphasized my billing experience, my ability to spot discrepancies, and most importantly, my suspicion that my current workplace might be involved in systematic fraud. I didn't mention Garrett by name, but I provided enough specific details about the suspicious claims I'd identified to get their attention. The response came faster than I'd expected. Within 3 days, I received a call from Special Agent Caroline who wanted to meet in person. We arranged to meet at a small restaurant across town, far from anywhere Garrett might accidentally see us. Caroline was nothing like what I'd expected from a government investigator. She was probably in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing too much human greed. But when I showed her the photograph of Garrett's email and explained the pattern of suspicious claims I'd identified, those tired eyes became very sharp, very quickly. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "At least 8 months that I can prove," I told her. "Probably longer. And you think your supervisor is working directly with medical facilities to create false claims?" "I think he's running an entire network. The amounts are too large and too coordinated for him to be working alone." Caroline studied the information I'd brought for nearly 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, she looked up at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We've been investigating reports of organized medical billing fraud in your area for over a year," she said, "but we've never had someone on the inside before. If you're willing to work with us, we might be able to build a case that shuts down the entire operation." "What would that involve?" "You'd continue working at your current job, but everything you do would be coordinated with our investigation. We'd provide you with specialized software to track transactions, and you'd report directly to me. But Raven, you need to understand, this isn't a game. If your supervisor realizes what you're doing, it could be dangerous." I thought about all the sick people whose legitimate claims might have been delayed or denied because of Garrett's fraud. I thought about the insurance companies who'd been paying out money for treatments that never happened. I thought about how Garrett had looked me in the eye and told me to stop asking questions about obvious fraud. "When do I start?" Caroline smiled for the first time since we'd met. "You already have." The next 3 months were the most intense of my life. During the day, I performed my regular job duties while secretly installing monitoring software on the office computers. Caroline had provided me with programs that could track every keystroke, every file access, and every transaction that passed through our systems. At night, I transmitted everything to the investigation team and helped them piece together the scope of Garrett's operation. What we discovered was far worse than I'd initially suspected. Garrett wasn't just working with 1 or 2 clinics. He'd built relationships with more than a dozen medical facilities across 3 counties. Some were legitimate clinics whose administrators had been corrupted by easy money. Others were complete fabrications, fake medical offices that existed only on paper, with rented mailboxes and disconnected phone numbers. The network processed false claims for everything from routine checkups to major surgeries. They specialized in procedures that were difficult for insurance companies to verify quickly: mental health treatments, physical therapy sessions, expensive diagnostic tests. By the time an insurance investigator could contact a patient to confirm they'd received treatment, the money had already been distributed and the trail had gone cold. But the most shocking discovery was how sophisticated the operation had become. Garrett and his associates had created an entire database of fake patients, complete with fabricated medical histories, insurance information, and even fake family members who could verify treatments if investigators called to check. They'd stolen the identities of real people, some living, some deceased, and used those identities to create convincing medical profiles. A construction worker from 2 counties over had supposedly received expensive cancer treatments without ever knowing his identity had been used. A retired teacher had apparently undergone multiple surgeries while she was actually traveling across the country visiting her grandchildren. Caroline estimated the total fraud at somewhere between $12 and $15 million over the past 2 years. "This is the largest medical billing fraud case we've ever encountered in this region," she told me during one of our evening meetings. "And we couldn't have built this case without your help." But building the case was only half the challenge. The other half was timing the arrests perfectly so that nobody in the network could escape or destroy crucial information. That's where Garrett's personality worked against him in ways he never could have imagined. He was paranoid about getting caught, which made him meticulous about creating backups of everything. He kept detailed records of every transaction, every fake patient file, every payment split with his network of corrupt clinics. In his mind, this information was insurance. If anyone in his network tried to betray him, he could destroy them with his comprehensive records of their involvement. What he didn't realize was that those same comprehensive records would become the foundation of the case against him. Caroline's team had been monitoring his computer activities for weeks, watching him update his files and back up his data. Every time he tried to protect himself from his criminal associates, he was actually making our case stronger. But Garrett was getting nervous. Several times during March, I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd started asking subtle questions about my work, wanting to know why I was staying late some evenings, and whether I'd noticed anything unusual about our claim processing procedures. The tension in the office had become almost unbearable. I could feel Garrett's suspicion growing every day, but I couldn't change my behavior without raising even more questions. I had to continue acting like the dedicated employee I'd always been while secretly coordinating with federal investigators to bring down the man who signed my paychecks. Then, on a Thursday morning in early April, everything started falling apart. I arrived at work to find Garrett in a heated phone conversation behind his closed office door. Even through the walls, I could hear him saying things like, "Too risky," and "We need to shut this down temporarily." When he finally emerged, his face was pale, and he was sweating despite the office air conditioning. "Raven," he said, his voice unnaturally casual, "I need you to pull all the files for patients whose last names start with M through R. There's been some kind of system glitch, and we need to verify that all the information was processed correctly." This was a lie. There had been no system glitch, and asking me to pull files alphabetically made no sense for any legitimate verification process. But those files included most of the fake patients I'd been tracking for Caroline's investigation. Garrett was trying to determine how much I knew. I spent the entire day walking a tightrope, pulling the requested files while trying to act like I hadn't noticed the pattern of false information they contained. Every time Garrett walked past my desk, I could feel him watching me, looking for any sign that I understood what I was handling. That evening, I met Caroline at our usual restaurant, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 other agents sat at our table, and their expressions were grim. "We think Garrett suspects something," Caroline said without preamble. Our monitoring software detected that he's been running security scans on the office computers, looking for unauthorized programs. My heart started racing. Does he know about the monitoring software you installed? We don't think so, but he knows something isn't right, and that makes this situation extremely dangerous for you. What do you mean? One of the other agents, a man named Paul, leaned forward. When people running fraud operations feel cornered, they look for someone to blame, someone to frame for their crimes so they can escape clean. You think he's planning to frame me? We think he's already planning it, Caroline said, which is why we need to move faster than we'd originally intended. How much faster? We're executing the arrests tomorrow morning, all locations simultaneously, so nobody in the network can warn the others. I felt a mixture of relief and terror. After months of living this double life, it would finally be over. But I also realized that if something went wrong, if Garrett somehow escaped or if the case fell apart, my life would be ruined. There's one more thing, Caroline said, her voice softer now. We've been monitoring Garrett's communications, and we know he's planning to make some kind of move against you tomorrow. We don't know exactly what, but our technical team intercepted fragments of emails mentioning your name and phrases like taking the fall and lawsuit. He's going to try to frame me for everything? That's our assessment, which is why tomorrow morning, instead of conducting a normal arrest, we're going to let Garrett make his move first. We want to catch him in the act of trying to frame you for his crimes. Paul pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. You'll wear this tomorrow. It's a transmitter that will broadcast everything happening around you directly to our surveillance team. We'll have agents positioned throughout your building, and the moment Garrett tries to frame you, we'll move in. I stared at the tiny device, realizing that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. What if something goes wrong? What if he actually convinces everyone that I'm the one who's been stealing? Caroline reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Raven, you've helped us build the most comprehensive fraud case in the history of this state. We have records of every transaction, every fake patient, every criminal contact in Garrett's network. There is absolutely no way he can frame you for crimes we can prove he committed. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Tomorrow would determine whether I emerged as the hero who brought down a criminal network, or as the scapegoat who took the blame for $15 million in theft. The next morning, I arrived at work with Caroline's transmitter hidden in my ear, and my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. But I had no idea that Garrett's plan to destroy me would actually become the final piece needed to destroy him instead. The moment he started screaming about that $15 million lawsuit, I knew exactly what Caroline had meant about letting him make his move first. And I also knew that in about 30 seconds, Garrett's entire world was about to collapse in the most spectacular way possible. The elevator doors opened and Caroline stepped out, followed by Paul and 3 other agents I'd never seen before. But Caroline wasn't wearing the casual clothes I was used to seeing her in. She was dressed in a formal business suit with a badge prominently displayed on her jacket. "Good morning, everyone," she announced to the entire office. "I'm Special Agent Caroline Morrison, with the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division. We're here to execute several warrants related to an ongoing investigation." Garrett's face went through a series of transformations that would have been funny if the situation weren't so serious. First confusion, then recognition as he realized who Caroline was, then absolute terror as he understood what was happening. "Wait," he stammered, still holding the folder he'd been waving around minutes earlier. "There's been some mistake. I'm the one who discovered the fraud. Raven is the one you want. I have proof right here that she's been stealing millions." Paul stepped forward and took the folder from Garrett's hands. He opened it and glanced through the papers inside, then looked up with an expression of professional amusement. "These are very interesting," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "These appear to be fabricated documents designed to implicate Miss Raven in crimes that our investigation has determined were committed by you, Mr. Garrett." "That's impossible," Garrett protested. "I've been tracking her activities for months. She's been processing fake claims, working with corrupt medical facilities, stealing money from insurance companies." Caroline walked over to stand next to my desk. "Mr. Garrett, we've been monitoring every computer in this office for the past 3 months. We have complete records of every transaction, every file access, every communication. Would you like to know what our investigation revealed?" The entire office was listening now. Everyone gathered around like we were performing some kind of play. Melody from accounting had actually pulled up a chair to get a better view. "We discovered that over the past 2 years, someone in this office has been running a sophisticated medical billing fraud operation," Caroline continued. This person created fake patient accounts, established relationships with corrupt medical facilities, and processed fraudulent insurance claims totaling approximately $15 million. Garrett opened his mouth to speak, but Caroline held up her hand. We also discovered that this same person has been extremely paranoid about getting caught, which led them to create detailed backup files of every criminal transaction they processed. Files that they stored on their work computer, thinking they were protecting themselves from their criminal associates. Paul pulled out a tablet and began reading from it. Vincent Patterson, fake patient cardiac surgery, billing $43,000. Created by user account G. Morrison on February 15th at 2:47 a.m. Garrett's face went white. Jennifer Walsh, fake patient cancer treatment, billing $68,000. Created by user account G. Morrison on February 22nd at 11:15 p.m. That's not possible, Garrett whispered. Michael Torres, fake patient kidney surgery, billing $92,000. Created by user account G. Morrison on March 3rd at 1:33 a.m. Paul looked up from his tablet. Should I keep going? Because we have records of over 300 fake patients, all created by your user account, all processed outside of normal business hours when you thought nobody would notice. But Caroline wasn't finished with him yet. Here's what makes this case particularly interesting, she said, walking closer to Garrett. About 4 months ago, we received a tip from someone in this office who had noticed suspicious billing patterns. This person was concerned that their workplace might be involved in insurance fraud. She gestured toward me. That person was Raven. She contacted our investigation division because she suspected her supervisor was stealing money from insurance companies. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on, so we offered Raven a position as an undercover investigator. For the past 3 months, she's been working as our inside operative, tracking every fraudulent transaction you processed, and feeding that information directly to our investigation team. Garrett stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. But here's the truly beautiful part of this operation, Caroline continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Raven didn't just help us track your crimes, she helped us reverse them. What do you mean, reverse them? Someone from accounting called out. Caroline smiled. Every time Garrett thought he was stealing money from insurance overpayments, that money was actually being redirected into a victim compensation fund managed by our division. He spent months working overtime, processing fraudulent claims, thinking he was building a secret fortune. She paused for effect. In reality, every dollar he stole was immediately transferred to an account that will be used to compensate the people whose identities he used for his fake patients. Garrett has spent the last 3 months working harder than he's ever worked in his life to fund his own victims' recovery accounts. The laughter that rippled through the office was probably inappropriate given the seriousness of the situation, but I couldn't blame my coworkers for finding some humor in Garrett's complete humiliation. The car he bought last month, Caroline added, purchased with state funds as part of our sting operation. The expensive watches, the new clothes, the fancy dinners he's been bragging about, all paid for with money that belongs to the state of state name, and all of it has been tracked and will be recovered. Garrett finally found his voice. But the lawsuit, he said desperately. I have proof that Raven was working with criminal medical facilities. I have phone records, financial transactions. Paul held up the folder Garrett had been waving around earlier. You mean these fabricated documents that you spent all last night creating? The ones that our monitoring software watched you produce in real time? He opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. Fake phone records, showing calls between Raven and medical facilities she's never contacted. Fabricated financial statements, suggesting she received payments from accounts that don't exist. Forged emails that our technical team can prove were created on your computer using your login credentials. Caroline stepped closer to Garrett. Your plan was to frame Raven for your crimes, file a fake lawsuit to make yourself look like a whistleblower, then disappear with the money you thought you'd hidden in various accounts. But every account you opened, every transaction you made, every criminal contact you established, we were watching all of it. This is impossible, Garrett said, but his voice had no conviction left in it. No, Garrett, this is justice. 2 agents moved behind him and began the arrest process. But Caroline wasn't done talking. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to the entire office, I want you to understand what Raven accomplished here. She didn't just help us catch one criminal. She helped us dismantle an entire network of medical billing fraud that was operating across 3 counties. She pulled out her own tablet and began reading. Based on the information Raven provided and the evidence we gathered during this operation, we executed simultaneous arrests this morning at 14 different locations, 12 corrupt medical facilities, 2 fake clinic operations, and over 30 individuals involved in systematic insurance fraud. The office erupted in applause, but Caroline held up her hand for silence. The total recovery amount will exceed $15 million, all of which will be returned to insurance companies and used to compensate victims of identity theft. This is the largest medical billing fraud bust in our state's history. As they led Garrett toward the elevator, he looked back at me one more time. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long were you working against me?" I thought about all the nights I'd spent transmitting his criminal activities to Caroline's team, all the fake patients whose accounts I'd helped track, all the stolen money I'd helped redirect to victim compensation funds. "From the moment you told me to stop asking questions about obvious fraud," I said. "From the second you made it clear that you wanted me to ignore crimes that hurt sick people." The elevator doors closed, and Garrett was gone. Caroline walked over to my desk and shook my hand. "Raven, what you accomplished here goes far beyond what we initially hoped for. You didn't just help us catch a criminal, you helped us restore money to people who desperately needed it." She gestured to the folder of fabricated documents Garrett had tried to use against me. "And the fact that he tried to frame you with obviously fake materials just added additional charges to his case. Obstruction of justice, filing false reports, attempted fraud against a federal investigator. How long will he be in prison? With the amount of money involved and the scope of the operation, 25 to 30 years minimum. He'll be an old man before he sees freedom again." Paul appeared beside us with a final piece of information that made everything perfect. "The network analysis is complete," he told Caroline. "Garrett kept such detailed records of his criminal operation that we've been able to identify and freeze assets belonging to all of his associates. Full recovery of stolen funds, plus interest penalties." He looked at me with genuine respect. "Raven, criminals usually try to cover their tracks, but Garrett's paranoia about his criminal partners led him to document everything so thoroughly that he basically wrote our entire case for us." As the investigation team packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Caroline handed me a business card, a real one this time, not the prop I'd used during Garrett's arrest. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position with our fraud investigation division," she said. "What you've demonstrated here, the patience, the intelligence, the courage to do what's right even when it's dangerous, those are exactly the qualities we need." I looked around the office where I'd spent months living a double life, where I'd watched Garrett steal millions of dollars while thinking he was smarter than everyone else, where I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting criminals destroy themselves with their own greed. When do I start? As I walked out of that building for the last time, I realized that the woman who'd been too trusting, too naive, too willing to believe that people in authority positions had earned their power through merit, that woman was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that real justice sometimes requires patience, planning, and the willingness to let bad people think they're winning right up until the moment they lose everything. If this story of ultimate workplace justice got your heart racing, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of people who refuse to let criminals get away with their crimes. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Raven's situation? Because sometimes the best revenge is simply giving people exactly what they deserve.